All right, welcome to the IDRPP's Time to Act Mental Health Echo. My name is Tori Coons, and I am project support for Project Echo. I have the privilege to introduce our housekeeping slides before we hear from our presenter. We record our Echo sessions for educational and quality improvement purposes. By participating in this session, you consent to being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, feel free to disconnect from the session, but please know that we hope you stay and would love to have you as a part of our session. During each of our Echo sessions, we have a subject matter expert or didactic speaker, case presentation or discussion, and professional networking. Echo is an interactive community. To help support that, we ask our participants to be engaged in asking questions after our didactic speaker and to provide feedback or ideas during our case presentation or discussion. In our Echo sessions, we ask our participants to respect the presenter by using the chat or raise hand feature to ask questions or contribute, keep questions brief and on topic, introduce yourself and your organization before asking a question, and to turn on your camera if you feel comfortable during the sessions, as it helps with connection, building community, and making networking more meaningful. As a presenter, it's a lot easier to look out into a screen of faces than blank screens, so that's just another reason why we like to turn on our cameras. As our discussions often surround our experiences with kids and families, please protect these individuals' privacies. We ask that you avoid using identifying information such as their name, as well as the names of family members, friends, or coworkers. If you have any questions as to what would be considered identifying information, please reach out to a hub member. All of our hub members will have an asterisk before their name or will shortly. For this session, we ask that you rename your profile to your first and last name, state, job title, and organization. To rename your profile, click on the participants icon in the bottom menu of the Zoom window, your profile, and then rename your profile in the dialog box. Today, if you have questions during the didactic presentation, we ask that you raise your hand or put them in chat, and then we will get to them as applicable during the presentation. So to use the raise hand feature in Zoom, hover your mouse over the Zoom window to locate the menu, select participants, and then click the raise hand option at the bottom. By attending this session, you can earn professional development credits. To do so, please fill out the survey that Leo will be dropping in the chat throughout this session. Canvas is where we store all the information to prepare for, review, and implement the strategies discussed in our Echo sessions. If you would like access to Canvas, email timetoact@aggies.usu.edu, and we will send you instructions for how to register. Case studies are where we share information about real-life situations, hear from colleagues about recommendations, and receive valuable feedback to take and apply. If you are interested in presenting a case, reach out to timetoact@aggies.usu.edu. We always like to put in a plug for our case studies. We love to have our participants present first because it really allows us to see what you guys are facing or experiencing in your work lives and day-to-day life. So if you have anything that comes up that you would like more support on or even some more ideas on, please, please, please reach out. We would love to have you present for us. So our mental health Echo team has an exciting announcement. We are kicking off a new year of sessions starting on August 19th, 2026. And our focus this year will be on maternal and infant mental health. Everyone here specializes in this area, and that's okay. We'll hope that you'll continue to join us as we learn together, because whether in our professional roles or our personal lives, many of us will encounter family, friends, or clients who are navigating maternal, paternal, or infant mental health challenges. This focus gives us an opportunity to build our understanding and feel more confident in how we support those around us. We're really excited for what's ahead this year, and we hope that you'll join us as we learn and grow together. More information will be shared on this via our Instagram and also through email. I guess our social media, not just Instagram. So to stay connected with everything Project Echo, follow our Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Without any further ado, I would like to turn the time over to McCall Lyon, who is our presenter today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, McCall, and then you're welcome to pull up yours.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tori. I'm happy to be here, everyone. If you're familiar with me, which I know some of you aren't, but if you are, you already know I'm terrible at multitasking. So I'm going to radically single task while I get my screen share pulled up, and then we'll get started. Alrighty. It looks correct on my end, but it typically does. So if you do not see a full-size slideshow in the background, also with my image, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to keep moving forward.
McCall, it looks great.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, friends. So I am here and I get to talk to you about one of my very favorite subjects today, which is your parasympathetic nervous system, but very specifically how we can take research and knowledge that is pretty well established that we have about the parasympathetic nervous system and use it to our advantage to support our own well-being. Now, I will also highlight that some of the approaches or interventions that I mentioned might also work well for children. So if they apply to the children with whom you work, or you want to share these approaches out more broadly, please feel free to do so. There are a couple of examples that are very specifically for adults. I'll highlight what those are when we get there. But otherwise, if you find that this is applicable in multiple ways in your role, I think that is fantastic. Super fast introduction for myself, because this is not really what you're here for, but my name's McCall Lyon. I am a licensed clinical psychologist at the Children's Center Utah. I currently serve as our teleconsultation director, which just means I get to run this really cool training program. We offer 100 hours of free training and consultation services every month. Please send me a follow-up email if you want to learn more about how we could support your infant and early childhood needs. But what I really want to focus on for today is the nervous system. I really want that to be the star of the show. So what you can anticipate, and oh, Tori, just to let you know, I emailed you the PDF of the slideshow instead of popping in chat because chat was not cooperating. But I think there is a PDF of this presentation that you are welcome to reference or keep if you want to do that. On my end, feel free to take screenshots or anything if you prefer, whatever works for you. But what you can anticipate together is we're going to review, and pretty quickly, given the time restraints that we do have, we're going to review the nervous system, just some highlights as it relates to the work we're going to do today. And then we will think specifically about how we might activate the parasympathetic nervous system on purpose. And we have a few different techniques I'll share for that. And then our third section really gets down to a very specific part of our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the vagus nerve. So in section 2, we'll take sort of a broader approach. We'll actually look at 4 of our important cranial nerves and also some important brain structure. We'll tie all that together. And then section 3 will focus pretty specifically on that vagus nerve. And then we'll have that wrap-up time at the end for Q&A. The objectives are basically just a more professionally worded version of what I already told you. So for sake of time, I'm going to keep moving forward. I do want to just add an additional acknowledgement that if the topics are a little sensitive, particularly when we think about what can cause an activated sympathetic nervous system, friends, that's our stress and trauma response, right? And so if you find yourself feeling any kind of intense emotion, if possible, take a minute, connect with yourself. Maybe you can learn something about yourself or what matters to you about the work that you do by tuning into your internal response. Maybe what you actually learn about yourself is you need a little break. And so I would encourage you, if you need to take a step away from your laptop for a moment, or if there's anything you need to do on your end, tune into yourself. And I would trust that you would navigate that in the way that's best for you. Okay, so let's think together about what do we know about our nervous system. Again, not an exhaustive summary by any means. This is a very complex functioning system of the body. What I'm actually going to focus on today then, of course, is the parasympathetic nervous system built right into the title, but also the sympathetic nervous system, because that is the counterpart, we could say, to the parasympathetic. The sympathetic nervous system, as you're probably already aware, but again, refreshers just to kind of hold it front and center in your mind. The sympathetic nervous system is what primarily controls our fight, flight, or freeze response. I imagine you're familiar with that phrase. It serves a critically important function in the human body. I will also acknowledge sometimes it's activated to more or less significance. So we have a little bit of sympathetic nervous system activation, and that's actually super healthy for us. If I have lost my keys and I need to drive to a presentation, for example, I want my sympathetic nervous system to come online, give me a little boost of adrenaline. I'm going to focus better. I'm going to maybe think, okay, where did I leave my keys? I will move more quickly. I will find them. I will get on with my day and I will recover. It's perfect. A lovely way for the body to operate. However, there are times when our sympathetic nervous system gets overactivated. This can happen in a couple different ways. One is just through chronic or long-term activation where the body doesn't have enough time to come back down to baseline in between. That is primarily what we're going to think about together today, although also I will acknowledge that we do see a similar response, sometimes just in regard to a single instance of severe exposure to a potentially traumatic event. That can happen as well. But we're really going to think primarily about what we know from the research about how this impacts us as providers. And what we know is typically how we're impacted from providers is that chronic long-term activation of the sympathetic nervous system. And that's what we'll really laser focus on today. And then, of course, we've got the parasympathetic in contrast. They're both important to the human body's functioning. We have sometimes a little nickname for parasympathetic is rest and digest. It also supports our immune system, a lot of different aspects of the healthy functioning body. Now, these two systems work in beautiful conjunction with each other, except as I mentioned, when there's that long-term or chronic activation without resolution, or sometimes just very severe activation. But I do want to highlight a couple of things. The goal is not no cortisol at all. And I think cortisol sometimes gets a bad rap, but we need cortisol. We need variable levels of cortisol in our body throughout the days. It is a critically important hormone for our functioning. We tend to get a little more in the morning. It wakes us up. It gets us ready for the day. Levels dip in the evening. That is a natural pattern for the human body. So our goal in today's presentation isn't how do we get no cortisol in our body ever again, but rather how do we check in with ourselves? And if we think that maybe our balance is a little out of balance, essentially, then what are some of the things we can do to feel regulated again? Now, the reason why we think this works is because of the vast interconnective nature of these bodily symptoms. So there are four primary nerves that are involved in the parasympathetic nervous system. And so I'm going to highlight all four of them, one of them more than other, and you'll see why probably in just a moment. So we've got our third cranial nerve. This one is interesting because it is the only of the four nerves that is primarily one direction. This is primarily a motor nerve. It doesn't take a lot of signals back to the brain. It mostly just takes signals from the brain about moving the eye. However, recent research suggests it probably works in conjunction with other parts of our brain, like the amygdala, and I'll say more about that on the next slide, to get us a beneficial response from certain activities to do with eyes, including making and sustaining eye contact, which I'll say more about that shortly. Then we have our seventh cranial nerve, which is a facial nerve. Couple cool things about this nerve, and all of them serve more functions beyond just this, of course. But this particular nerve has a lot to do with our ability to produce saliva, also like having moisture in our nose and in our eyes, which are things that we need, which ties it into our immune system, something that the parasympathetic nervous system is highly associated with. Fascinatingly, this nerve also carries some of our taste sensations, including sour tastes, which I'm going to come back to when we get to our intervention section. And then we've got our ninth cranial nerve. I'm not going to spend as much time on this nerve. He's a cool guy too, but mostly he's impacting saliva as well. And then the 10th cranial nerve, which I've been working up to, you may know this as the vagus nerve. That term comes from the Latin word for wanderer because it is massive. It is so huge. So these other three cranial nerves are pretty local, more or less. But the vagus nerve spreads for the most part to every major organ system of the body. It is also a mixed nerve, just like the two I presented before. That means it's bidirectional. It both has afferent or sensory signals, which means that it brings information in to the brain, and efferent or motor signals, which means information is coming out of the brain. If this and the other two nerves were not bidirectional, then some of what I'm describing to you might not work as effectively, but because we can sometimes have some input on the sensory signals that these nerves are sending, that makes them particularly influential in activating our parasympathetic nervous system on purpose, which is what I'm going to talk about in section 2. Now, I keep mentioning the amygdala, and I'm sure you're familiar that there is an amygdala in our brains, and it actually, like, the amygdala is having like a glow decade because it actually has more functions that we know of now than we thought, like even just 20 years ago. So probably when you think amygdala, you might think, and correctly so, that this is something that helps us determine what is a threat and then what do we want to do about that. Yes, absolutely, that does happen. Also, though, it is just as importantly involved in assessing the not threats and what we want to do about the not threats. And the not threats are often tied to good things, right? So the amygdala actually is heavily involved in our interpretation of positive events as well. And it actually has a lot of connection to the reward circuitry in our brain. And this is important because what we now know is the amygdala helps us weigh out future planning in conjunction with our frontal lobes. Now, here's where this matters in terms of the parasympathetic nervous system is, well, it matters for a lot of reasons, but one of the things I want to highlight is that we believe it is mediated, the impact of how we interpret emotions is mediated by direct gaze. Remember that oculomotor nerve that I mentioned that is primarily motor, but I was like, we think it's probably connecting to this function as well. So when we make and sustain eye contact with someone who cares about us, or even someone who has a neutral affect. Separate studies have shown this for most people, and there are certainly going to be exceptions to this. There will be individual exceptions and there'll be cultural exceptions around eye contact. But for most or many people, the reward circuitry of our brain starts to light up when we make and sustain that eye contact, which sends signals to the amygdala that backwards that everything is okay, and that can signal the rest of our brain and our body that this is in fact a non-threat. Everything's going to be just fine. Also, I want to highlight the hippocampus. Again, a great many functions. You probably think of memory, which, yes, very good. It is associated with that. And very specifically, one of the things that it can do is it can make associations between our memories. And so the hippocampus is directly connected to the amygdala as well. And it can tell the amygdala, we've lived through this kind of thing before. I know you feel stressed right now. Actually, we're going to be fine. And that can mediate our stress response as well. Interestingly, though, the impact of stress in and of itself shrinks the size and the connectivity of both the hippocampus and the amygdala. So our ability to regulate is negatively impacted by the impact of stress, but that's exactly when we need these functioning systems. The other thing, of course, with the hippocampus is it is directly tied into the production and the cessation of production of cortisol. So now we have come full circle with cortisol. And we're just going to hold in mind how not all of these few important structures tie in together, and they work with those cranial nerves and the parasympathetic nervous system as a whole to maintain and regulate our well-being. So these are going to be the primary star players when we think about why the interventions I'm going to share with you in the coming slides work in the first place. I said this at the beginning, but it's so important. I will say it again. It is really good that we have a sympathetic nervous system. I don't want that little friend to get a bad rap. It is excellent. It fills an important function. And we want to be really mindful about that chronic activation and the potential impact that can have. What we'll do next is we'll move to think together about two types of intervention. One is immediate relief, and then the other is some long-term interventions that per research may have some long-term benefits. Now, the last thing I want to highlight in this kind of more like academic portion before we get to the interventions is you might be wondering, how does this even develop in the first place? And we think that this is absolutely very influenced by environment. Interestingly, there may be some other components as well. So I won't dive deeply into this, but I do want to highlight that there's some research to suggest, at least when it comes to the vagus nerve, that there may be some association with maternal experience, because what this particular study cited on your screen right now showed was that mothers who self-report having high levels of depression and or anxiety symptoms, either or both, during pregnancies, the activity level of their vagus nerves was measured in this study. And I'll actually tell you how we measure that a little bit later on because I think it's fascinating. But for now, just trust that we can measure it. It is not intrusive and it's easy to measure, actually, quite frankly. So these mothers had the strength or the activity level of their vagus nerves measured during pregnancy, and the ones who reported high levels of depression and or anxiety had these less active vagus nerves, as did their newborns measured at birth. Now, this is actually not definitive proof that it's genetic, though, right? Because that newborn has been developing in utero for a lot of months. And so this doesn't exactly pinpoint the origins per se, but it does tell us that this is something that we can see show up from infancy, from birth. We are also aware per research, and I believe I present on this in the third section, but we're going to remember this section because we actually know from research, even as early as infancy and early childhood, the activity level of our vagus nerve is actually predictive of some future successes. So now that we're holding that history in mind, what I'll also encourage you to do, because that can sound really grim, right? Like the babies come out and they already have less active vagus nerves. But we know from research that everyone, including tiny little infants, can strengthen their parasympathetic nervous system. We'll cover that in section 3. But before we think about strengthening, let's just think about activating. What if we need in the moment relief? Like right in that moment where you know you are having a stress response, what are some things that research would suggest might work for your body? And I do say the word might on purpose, friends, because we also know from research that actually your parasympathetic nervous system is probably going to be most responsive to the things that are your preference. And it's actually probably not going to be particularly responsive to the things that you find aversive. So on any of the upcoming slides, if I mention a way of engaging and you think, that sounds awful. And there's some of those for me too. Don't worry, friends, no judgment. If you think it sounds awful, you can try it if you want. I'm not going to stop you. But maybe that's not the place to start, right? Like maybe start with one that you think, and when you hear it, you think, oh, I might like that. That might work for me. You know yourself, attune to your body. If something would bring you like psychological distress to engage in, I'm going to give you some examples in a moment, it's not going to work for you. So basically choose these interventions mindfully based off what you think will get you the most mileage. But we can think statistically, like what works for the widest number of people. And sometimes I like to organize this in categories of relational activation. So what can you do if you have another human being who's able to help you? And then also independent activation. What can you do on your own? We'll get to that in just a moment. But you can see on your slide right now what I like to think of as sort of the trifecta of relational activation. And I'm always going to start with relational activation because if you're familiar with the work we do at the Children's Center Utah, we focus on the relationship. And I would imagine that's consistent with a lot of your roles as well. And so there's a reason, if we think of like the biomechanics of the body, there's a reason why we think connecting with someone when you're having that sympathetic nervous system activation, why this helps to regulate you. And if you can do 3 things at once, the things your eyes have probably already read on the screen, if you can do these 3 things in conjunction with each other, you are likely to maximize your benefit. So one of the really cool things about the parasympathetic nervous system is you can try more than one intervention at once. I actually have several activities that I'll recommend that are that combine different intervention points, right? Maybe they're getting different nerves involved, for example, or different parts of the brain. That actually is likely to increase your efficacy. So in this example, if you can talk to someone you care deeply about, whenever possible, make and sustain eye contact with that person, unless culturally or individually you are the exception to that, in which case tune into yourself. And then whenever possible, an appropriate physical contact. You may have heard some things about this before, about hugs, for example. You may have heard longer is better, which is true per research, but it is not necessary. Even brief can be better than nothing. Also, you may have heard about skin-to-skin contact, like in terms of the parent-child relationship. That is, we're pulling from similar research there as well, but you'll just kind of figure out how this fits into your role, of course. Now, the one thing that we would need to do all these 3 things together at the same time is be in person, right? But what if we're not in person? Can we still use relational activation? Well, research would suggest yes, and there's a couple different ways we think this works. So the thing that we'll rule out if we're not in person, we immediately rule out physical contact, and I guess that'll be the case until we get really good hologram technology. When that happens, send me a follow-up email. I will let you know how it's impacting our nervous systems or what the research says. But for now, if we're in person, we're probably not going to get the physical contact. But what we could still maybe get is those soothing familiar vocal patterns and the eye contact. And actually, if you had asked me 7 or 8 years ago, earlier in my career, if I thought that making eye contact over a video call could activate the parasympathetic nervous system basically as effectively as making eye contact in person, I would have, 1, laughed, and 2, I would have guessed no. And friends, I would have been wrong. Because what we've actually found from modern research has got very interesting during COVID, as you might imagine. It seems most human brains can't tell the difference because videos have access to the same things typically that we're getting with the eye contact and the vocal patterns in person. So you do need to be able to see their eyes. There needs to be serve and return, right? This needs to be interactive. But what the study found is that nervous system activation did not occur with a pre-recorded clip, and it did not occur with a photograph. It was only the live interactive video call that was effective. So that is an option. You can have a video call. Let me cite that for you. I shared my references in the PDF handout. And then if you can't do the video call, of course, even if you just have a phone call, you could get those soothing, familiar vocal patterns. All of those do, of course, rely on your relationships with other people and the availability of other people to provide support at that time. So, what are some independent, immediate relief strategies we could use? Again, tune into what you think will work best for you and start there. But research is very positive on deep breaths. I will share a little more information about this, and we talk about deep breaths a lot, quite frankly, I think, in the mental health community. But a couple interesting tidbits include you want to aim for approximately 6 breaths per minute. Saying that makes me feel like a hypocrite. I don't count breaths. I don't prefer breathing activities where I have to count anything. I really want to radically single focus on my breath. So if you are like me and you don't want to count, just try to slow your breathing approximately by about half, and it is probably going to put you in that range. I just like eyeball it, essentially. But if you like to count them, count your breaths, go for about 6 per minute. You want to inhale deeply, and then you want the exhale to be longer than the inhale, or if you have a preference, equally long is also fine. Remember, your body is most responsive to your preference. What we do know from research, though, is when the inhale is notably longer, that's activating breathing. It's still very useful. Like if you are at a boring conference presentation, for example, and you're trying to keep yourself awake, do a really long inhale and a shorter exhale. That's going to activate just a little bit the sympathetic response, which does help our focus in moments when we need it. But if you're actually already overactivated with the sympathetic nervous system, what you want is that long emphasis on the exhale. That is the kind of breathing that the body naturally does when we are in a safe and regulated state. And remember, some of these nerves are bidirectional, so the signals they send back can, in fact, signal safety. And then we have those associations, the memories that when we breathe deeply, things are usually okay. Now we're going to move on because there's other examples from research as well. So we've got controlled movement. It does need to be controlled. I emphasize that twice on your screen here. It's also on the bottom bullet point. And that is because, like many other things, the interventions we'll talk about, if we are not in good control of ourselves, our body makes a different association. There's a phrase of sometimes people responding to crisis, quote, like a chicken with your head cut off. That is actually pretty literal. My cousins grew up on a farm. Anyway, so there's a sort of like frantic movement that the body can exhibit. That's not helpful. That signals to the body, oh, yep, things are unsafe right now, or I should be unsettled, right? That's a familiar feeling, and it signals panic. But when we are in control of our movements, actually, these types of things can help some of the energy levels from an activated sympathetic nervous system dissipate from our bodies. Sympathetic nervous system activation comes along with a lot of energy, and we need it to go somewhere. Now, if there was a real life or death scenario in front of you, it would go to surviving the real life or death scenario, and it would dissipate that way, would use it all up right away. But what if this is something that doesn't allow us to use up all that energy? So here's some in the moment options. There's some research on progressive muscle relaxation. You can find great options online. There's one specific for kids. There's ones for adults. Yoga also has some promising research behind it. Also, just really that quick controlled examples of exercise. I love walking around the block. I'll do that one. I'll walk up and down my stairs if the weather won't allow me to walk around the block. You could do jumping jacks. Jumping jacks are aversive to me. So it's just one example. Don't do it if you're going to hate it. But sometimes, particularly kids, really like what they can make their bodies do. And jumping jack's a cool example of that. That is controlled, right? But it's movement. You could bounce or roll a ball back and forth. There's a lot of different examples. We want to feel under control, but we want to give the energy somewhere to go. This next one is one of my favorites. That's going to lose all meaning. I keep calling everything my favorite. But this is truly one of my favorites. This is the act of salivation. So I mentioned there are 2 of the 4 primary nerves involved with parasympathetic nervous system activation that involve creation of saliva. So what we know from research is that your parasympathetic nervous system controls your digest functions. Remember, rest and digest? salivation is actually one of the first steps of digestion. It starts to break down the food before it even makes it into our stomachs, right? And if you need a reference for this, if you think of a time you were ever very nervous, like maybe before a speech or just like standing in line for a big roller coaster, you might have noticed your mouth got really dry. Sorry, friends, it's the power of suggestion. Whenever I say that, I actually have to pause and get a drink. Okay, I promise I'm not nervous. But so when this happens, it could be that your digestive system was turned off, probably temporarily, especially if it was for just a little stressor. But you might have a reference for this, right? So that's why our mouths get dry when we are frightened or panicked or in a trauma scenario. So if we imagine, right, if we just imagine eating a sour candy, even the suggestion of that taste of sour can trick our body into salivating. Essentially, you'll start to produce saliva. You could try it now if you want. You don't have to, but if you want, imagine eating and taking a big bite of like a juicy lemon or like a sour warhead. Or I've got these like little sour candies that I keep on my desk. Imagine that. And as you imagine eating that, you might notice you start to have those saliva levels rise in your mouth as well. You want to maximize the effectiveness of this intervention. You want to make sure the tip of your tongue is submerged in that saliva pool, essentially in the bottom of your closed mouth. And I mentioned that you can pair this with other activities. You can often pair these interventions together. Here's another example of that. There's a wonderful progressive muscle relaxation activity. I do have a printout of like one version of it. If anyone's interested, I'm happy to send the little PDF. It's not the only version out there, though. But it's a progressive muscle relaxation where you imagine moving to a lemon tree. Remember, we talked about progressive muscle relaxation on the previous slides and some of the research there. And then when you get to the lemon tree, how you integrate these two after you've done kind of the squeezing and the relaxing of the muscles to travel there in this imaginary activity, then you visualize eating the lemon, picking and eating the lemon. So you're actually activating using two different pathways at the same time, which is why we think you can layer these approaches. Now, the next example, I'm gonna phrase it kind of vaguely, and that's artistic expression. And studies do tend to be very specific, right? So studies like to limit variables as much as we can. So what that means is that they are looking at one type of art at a time. Ones that have been studied a lot include coloring, drawing, and like sketching, painting, those types of artistic expressions. They're not the only ones that have been studied, though. So each study is looking at one type of art, but what we actually see if you look at like meta-analysis, for example, is that they're starting to maybe show some really similar findings. So maybe it's not the type of art that really makes a difference. Maybe it's just engaging in the act of creating something. So something about that creative process. Now, you may like a type of art that's never been studied before. In fact, odds are pretty good that's the case for at least one person on this call. Remember, preference is important to your parasympathetic nervous system. So even if there's not specific research on the type of art you like to do, you could try engaging in it just to see if it works. And if you think you find a benefit, I think there is a fair amount of specific research that would back you up. Now, here's what I mentioned. We're focusing on ourselves during today's presentation, but a lot of these you can use with children, and particularly like creating art. Kids tend to love that as well. Here's one that if you're going to try it, and you don't have to try it, friends, I don't do this one, but if you're going to try it, I don't recommend it for children. So if you're using this with children, it is not my advice to do so. But this is being activated through cold water. Now, when I say cold, you might think of like a deep plunge in like an icy lake. The research on that's really interesting. That does work, but you don't have to go that far. The reason why that works is because it activates your sympathetic nervous system so extremely that in the sort of compensating parasympathetic response, you get a rush of relief and you get some clarity from the sympathetic nervous system activation before, which is cool, but not sustainable probably on like a day-to-day basis. Or if you're like in the office and you need some relief, most of us can't just go jump in a lake, right? So what do we know about the research on just cool water? It doesn't even have to be freezing cold. Actually, most of the research doesn't suggest it needs to be freezing cold at all. Most of the research is somewhere in the low 50s range. The numbers get wonky because it's usually done in Celsius, but roughly low 50s range. And so what you can do if you want the most effectiveness is submerge, or at least partially submerge. It seems like the lower jaw and neck are particularly important. Your face in water that is around this temperature. That's also a big ask in the middle of your workday. So if you don't want to spray up your face with water in the middle of your day, you could step outside if it is chilly. Again, this is for adults. We often bundle kids up when it's 50 degrees outside, but you as a grown-up could choose to do so. Also, some research would suggest you might get a scaled down version of this benefit if you just rinse your hands in cold water. This is more accessible to many of us, I think, during our day. I have done this one before. If you're going to use the hand method, try to get it on your wrists as well as your hands. Now, we're going to lean next into thinking about vagal tone, and there's going to be some overlap in this section and the section before, and for really good reason, but I'll also highlight what the important differences are when we get there. So vagal tone was something I mentioned a little earlier in the presentation, and we talked about the study with the expecting mothers, right? And their vagal tone was measured. So this phrase, vagal tone, it refers more or less to the activity level of your vagus nerve. But really more specifically, what it is referring to is your nerve's ability to mediate your heart rate. And how we measure it, because I said before, we can measure this quite easily. How we measure this is in heart rate variability, also referred to as HRV because it's a mouthful. And that refers to the fluctuations in the time intervals between one heartbeat to the next. So this might not be something that you've spent a lot of time thinking about, or maybe you're already familiar with this research, of course. But actually, when we are at a calm, resting state, the heartbeats do not need to be perfectly even. We just don't need that. So it's very small variability, but it can be measured. And there is a little bit of variability between one heartbeat to the next. That is a good thing. It is what the body does when it's at its resting state. In contrast, if the body is entering into that fight, flight, or freeze mode, what it needs, part of that activation process, is making sure the space between heartbeats is very regular. Think back to those examples of a time you might have felt a little stress. Maybe it was before you presented, maybe it was standing in line for a roller coaster, or you were about to watch a scary movie, or whatever the example is for you going into a haunted house. Those are some kind of like light touch examples. You might have noticed that your heart was beating in a way that was much more noticeable, right? We talk about it pounding in our chest, which is true, but also because we need to be mobile, we need to be ready to activate ourselves as needed. Your heartbeat was probably very regular, thunk, thunk, not a lot of variability in the space between, because your body thinks it needs that, right? We can't have the luxury of variability. So this is, again, the typical functioning of the human body, and there is a good use for that heartbeat regulating when we need the sympathetic nervous system activation. But what we see is that you can also measure differences in individuals. So some people have what we call higher vagal tone. What that means is when they're at their resting state, they have a little more variability than other people. And that actually suggests that their vagus nerve is a little bit stronger. It's probably going to activate more regularly after a stressful event, and it can bring us back to that calm and resting state. So what we're going to think about in this section is what can we do about our vagal tone? Because actually it can be purposely improved. It's a little bit like exercising a muscle, but it's also very different because your nerve is not going to get like swole, so to speak, like if you go work out your muscles at the gym. And there are a fair amount of parallels between those two, because one of the key factors in strengthening vagal tone is that day-to-day practice, much like building a muscle at the gym. So what we know from research, and I'll go over some specific interventions in the coming slides, is that a lot of the in-the-moment strategies I talked about before, while they are useful in the moment, if you find a way to integrate them into your daily practice, you can actually strengthen your nervous system response in the future. So let's think about what a few of those are. And again, I want to highlight these do have to be done on a daily or near daily basis. When I mentioned them being useful before, that's just in the moment when you need it. But if you want the long-term benefits, overlap with what we talked about before included deep breathing exercises. So having that daily deep breathing practice, progressive muscle relaxation, yoga. And actually, there is some research that suggests having a regular daily cold shower practice. But remember, I'm not personally recommending that one. I don't do that one myself. If you're interested, though, if you heard that example and you were thinking, I might try that, then what you can do, it doesn't have to be the whole shower either. What we know from research is if you're going to try it at one point in time, the most important time is right before you end your shower. So if you want to try this one, you could take a completely normal shower if that's something you do every day in your routine, and then just turn the water colder. Remember, it doesn't have to be frigid, but like 50-ish degrees right near the end. Try that one if you'd like. Snowshoeing. So I'm just really perfect. I'm just really thinking of how can you get that heart rate elevated regularly through exercise every single day, or at least as often as you can. But here's a relief. If you're like me and you're like, oh man, how much do I have to exercise to get this benefit? Not too much, thankfully. So what we actually know from research is that when people engage in extreme amounts of exercise, and I'm really talking extreme, where this is one of the larger portions of your day, we see this research coming from like professional bodybuilders, for example, or other roles like that. But in those instances, we realize the body reaches a point of diminishing returns, and it gets to a point where that actually decreases your HRV. So just typical person amount of exercise, unless you want to ramp up the intensity. And then there's probably a fair amount of wiggle room, we could say, that you would have. And if you think you're exercising to the point where it could be tipping that scale, talk to your medical provider, certainly, to get some advice there. But moving on to some other examples, what we also have is some research on chanting. So this was fascinating research. And what this study suggested, it is probably the very specific sound pattern that chanting in and of itself generates. So if you want, you're welcome to try this. And if you want to try it, but you want to turn your camera off first before you try it, feel free, not that you have to. But I'm going to kind of walk you through this. If you make the sound, which sounds a little bit like this, right? If you were to do that, you might notice there's some vibrations, and you can feel them in your mouth. You can feel them kind of to the back of your throat. And now if you make a different sound, the s sound, not the same kind of vibration. So what the study did is it asked people to do just that. They did chanting, they made a sound, or they engaged in a soundless meditation. Now, we do know from research that there's some benefit to meditation in and of itself. But if you want to increase the potential benefit, the study actually found that chanting is what creates the vibrations created from chanting that seems to bring the benefits. The great news about this, again, if you want to share some of this with kiddos, this is often really accessible to kids. Kids might really enjoy this one. It's actually kind of a fun sound to make, but you could just use it with yourself, of course, as well. Again, I'm not going to count seconds, but if you want to count seconds, the research is out there. Try to hold the O for about 5 seconds and the M for about 10 seconds. Or if you're like me, just put a little more emphasis on the M sound at the end. And I think you'll even notice if you try this, that those two letters make different vibrations in and of themselves. So try to have about a 1-to-2 ratio of the O sound to the M sound, give or take. Now, that research actually is applicable in a lot of other ways. So loud singing and gargling, we think, works for the exact same vibrational reasons as chanting. So if you already have like a very strong morning dental hygiene routine and you're like gargling mouthwash every morning, in addition to making your dentist very proud, you have been improving your parasympathetic nervous system strength, and you might not have even realized you were doing it. So that's kind of a cool bonus. Does not have to be mouthwash, remember. So again, if you're thinking like, what about kids, or maybe mouthwash isn't your particular preference, that's okay. What we are gargling, assuming it's a safe liquid, that doesn't matter. It is literally the act of gargling itself, using those muscles, that creates the vibration that gives us the feedback that we need. Also, singing loudly, same basic things work. And again, if you're looking for children and the interventions that work for them, if you are in an environment where you have access to children more often than not, because remember, these are daily or near daily, or maybe you work with parents and you can give them this advice, or maybe you have your own kiddos. They're great at singing loudly, right? So like, let's use that to our advantage. Volume actually does seem to make a difference, which is why this is one of my favorite daily skills to practice with preschool age kids. Now, you can combine these together. Other interventions work at the same time, right? So I mentioned exercise in the moment relief, as well as a daily practice. And you could do the same basic thing here. You could have like song and dance parties, either in the moment for some relief, or if it worked for you, have a song and dance party every day, and then you should get that vagal nerve strength. Now, quick note, I know we're here for ourselves, but I do want to highlight, I mentioned near the beginning that I was going to come back to the research on infants, and pretty early in life, vagal tone is correlated, and that's important, right? But it's correlated with socio-emotional skills, and we do know from other bodies of research that socio-emotional skills as early as preschool are predictive of almost every single desirable life outcome. It's really hard to find a life outcome that actually isn't predicted by social and emotional skills early in life. So we know from research this is important for kids as much as it's important for us. And as I mentioned, some of the interventions work great for children, but even the ones that work probably pretty well for children, like chanting, for example, or making art, that's not going to work for an infant yet either, right? So what about our very youngest of friends? I'm just going to quickly highlight the research on infant massage is really promising. Also, the research on infant massage goes a lot into other functions like attachment. So there could be multiple reasons why this could be beneficial. It is very different than adult massage. I'm actually not trained in it though, so I want to be really clear about that. Several of my colleagues at the Children's Center Utah are. Sometimes we're aware of community partners that are offering trainings in infant massage, and sometimes we're able to offer infant massage classes to parents. If you're interested in being kept up to date about either of those, please let me know. Although I don't always know everyone who's offering these classes. If you know someone who's offering infant massage classes right now, feel free to type that in chat and share that resource with your colleagues. Otherwise, send me an email. I'll keep you up to date if I hear anything. Now, interestingly, massage seems to work for adults as well, but this is like near the carotid artery. Again, very different than infant massage. Also, some interesting early research on foot massage. So that's something that's interesting to you. The research is out there. I'm going to do a quick shout out to some other research-based areas. We won't dive in, though, before we wrap up and go to questions. Research would suggest things like having a healthy gut biome, which really makes sense when we think of how many connections the vagus nerve has with our gastrointestinal tract. It's not just limited to the vagus nerve, of course, but that is a pretty big influencer. There are some medical devices. Some are invasive, some are very non-invasive and are very accessible just to like someone who would be interested to purchase them or to talk to their doctor about them. They can do things like support vagal tone growth or vagus nerve stimulation. Again, I'm not an expert or a salesperson in any of these. There are also potentially medications, some that exist now, some that are being researched. I can't prescribe in my role as a psychologist anyway. So again, just something you can look into if you're interested. All right, friends, I think I'm basically right on time for Q&A. So I'll just quickly highlight that check out our website if you want more information about any of those free training services or our consultation services that we're able to offer. Also, this is kind of like an all roads lead to Rome kind of situation. If you've got questions, just email me. Eventually, your question's going to make it back to me probably anyway. So feel free to just make outreach about this presentation or any of our other services. I promise I'd be happy to hear from you. But let me pause here. Maybe friends have questions during our wrap-up period. Does anyone have a question?
Okay, it seems like we have a question. I did want to first of all thank you, McCall. I actually want to be a therapist. I don't know that I mentioned this to you. So like
Oh, lovely.
I'm in my undergrad right now, but like going into all of this was so fascinating for me. So thank you so much. But it does look like Emily Stewart has a question. She said, has there been any research on being outside in the parasympathetic nervous system?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Okay, so what I have to check in my head is the mechanism of benefit through the parasympathetic nervous system. But there is research on being outside, absolutely. And I would see there's where I want to exercise some caution because I'm not recalling which nerve or function it would be specifically, but there is research on specifically access to sunshine and how that is regulating as well. The research on grounding, I do think so, like particularly like having I'd mentioned skin to skin research, but there also is some research on like skin to dirt or something like that, skin to grass kind of phenomenons. Actually, yes, I do think that one is associated with the parasympathetic nervous system. Being outside does help. I just want to be careful associating the cause. And then can I provide an example of a medical device, a non-invasive? Yeah, so I think they have, again, I'm not an expert on this, but there are like little vibrational devices that can be used to simulate, is that the word I want? Nope, stimulate a similar response to what would happen, kind of like the chanting, actually. That's probably a vast oversimplification, but if you look up, I think it's through the vagus nerve specifically, but just play it safe, look up parasympathetic nervous system activation and vibrational devices, and that will probably get you where you need to go. I don't own Google, but I suspect that will get you where you need to go. Thank you. And if I didn't thank you for your feedback, if I didn't fully answer anyone's questions, please feel free to let me know as well.
I do have a brief request. You mentioned,
Yeah.
sorry, this is Tori again. You mentioned a progressive muscle relaxation kind of guide that included that lemon tree. Would you be willing to
Yes.
share that?
Absolutely. Yeah. If I email that out to you, are you like a good common source? And then if people want it, or you could just email people whether they want it or not, they can disregard it if they
Yes.
don't need it.
Yeah, I can get it out, but I was like, I really would like access to that, so I wanted to request.
Yes, happy to share. And then I'll just highlight too, if you want to edit that, feel free to do so, right? So one, I don't own the activity in and of itself. And two, there's a bunch of different versions of it online as well. And so if you want to make yours longer or shorter or add details or whatever makes it fit for you, the activity itself is not the part that was specifically researched. It's just progressive muscle relaxation in general, and then the lemon tree component with the salivation.
I love that. Thank you. And then if anyone does
Absolutely.
have any other questions, we still have a couple of minutes.
I have a question, McCall, and good to see
Yeah.
you.
Hello.
It's Ilse. So I have a question about the controlled movement because I wonder if you can remember more about that research because I'm personally really interested in things like somatic practice and dancing that comes from your body, basically. So where you kind of don't control the movements, but it's very calming, but it's
Yes.
not like, move your hand this way, now move your hand that way. It's often done with an attuned other who is walking you through, but it doesn't have to be, but it's really relaxing. And so that's not what I would call controlled. So do you remember what controlled was
Oh,
defined as?
yes, caveat. Controlled, I think, was probably the word I gave to it when I was putting the research summary into my PowerPoint. So, what the research is actually describing would be inclusive of what you're describing, I believe. It's movement where we understand the function. So movement where we are like panicked feels different to our body, but Ilse, I think in this example, and I do see that a hand is raised as well. But I'll just kind of wrap this one up first. But I think in this example, you're describing very calm and there's intentionality behind the movements. It's just that they're not pre-planned in advance. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. That's a good way
beautiful.
to
Yes,
describe.
that would
Yeah.
absolutely still fall under the positive research. Really, what it was trying to rule out is the kind of movements we do when we're panicked. Like, again, if you lose your keys and you're running around through your house frantically, that signals things are not well. But what you're
Okay.
describing, and I'd be curious actually, I've not seen this research specifically, but I bet it overlaps with the social component and the relational component as well.
Mhm.
So now you've got a calming environment, you've got a guide who is attuning to you, and you're moving with intention, even if you don't know what comes next. So I think for those reasons, I bet it
Okay.
does work.
Thank you. That clarifies it.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And then I saw from Heather in chat, I do. So I don't know if anyone remembers. Well, I don't know if my screen will let you see it because I've got that little background screen. Do you guys remember Altoid sours? They don't exist anymore. This is a knockoff. They're very sour. They're just little sucking on candies. I probably eat like 3 or 4 a day. They're really good. If you eat more than that, at least for me, the citric acid will start to rub away my tongue. So there are limits. I use other approaches to balance it out. And then I think I see a hand raised. Like, Tori, can I just call on? Oh, yes, excellent, Holly.
Hi, yes, thank you so much. It really kind of goes along with your last question too. I think with Elsa, I think was her name.
Yes.
So it goes along having a guide almost for that regulation. And I know that sometimes like horses are used with sometimes some types of regulation for kids with different disabilities, autism sometimes, and connecting with this. So I guess I'm curious with the comment about being out in nature, regulating with grounding with another individual, also pet related animals, focusing on their breathing on nature. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. And while I'm sure nature is a component to your point, where you took that at the end of your question, actually, that's the research I'm more familiar with. And yeah, animals can activate this similar response very much like relational activation with humans can have. And actually, to your point, some people gravitate a little more to animals than to humans. And since there is research on both, and again, the parasympathetic nervous system cares about your preference. If somebody is regulating more effectively, like with an assistant therapy dog or through equine therapy or something like that, I think we actually have research to back that up as well. Interestingly, there's some research on temperature too. So I'm also thinking like for horses, right? Like that can be really soothing, that consistent temperature. That's probably part of it. But just the relational piece, the breathing, looking at their faces or their eye contact, I think is probably very influential. Does that get to what you were asking?
Yeah, it does. It does. It's I mean it's something that I bring up all the time with clients, and it seems to have a really good most clients really appreciate that connection. And
Yeah.
so the study, yeah, I would love to know more about the different studies out there. Maybe that's something that I could focus on. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to send me a follow-up email. I don't think I have any animal specific like research saved to my desktop, so to speak. But if I bump into any or if I'm reminded of any in the meantime, I'd be happy to send you a follow-up.
Oh, thank you. I would love that. Yes.
Excellent. Well, I'm mindful of time and I don't want to take away from the case presentation time.
No, you're good. I was like, if anyone has another question, we do have another minute that we could ask it, but if not, we can transition over. Making sure I thought I saw someone's microphone come off, but I don't think it was actually someone's microphone. So thank you again, McCall. I'm not seeing any questions come up in the chat or any raised hands. Actually, no, we're good. It was a thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
I, for one, really enjoyed your presentation. Your energy and your knowledge is just so much fun to listen to and to learn from. So thank you for joining us and for presenting on this. I know it was really beneficial for me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'd love to talk about this topic. So if anyone has questions about this or any of our other services, please let me know. I'd be happy to hear from you.
We do have a fast question from Jacelyn. Sorry if I mispronounced that, but she wondered if we could, like, if they could follow you somewhere online or
Oh,
contact
I love that question, except I have no emotional regulation when it comes to social media. So not me specifically. Sorry, I'm not on anything. But you can certainly follow the Children's Center Utah. And I do help in conjunction. Sometimes I'll help them post like little couple minute like wellness clips. We'll put them on Facebook. We'll put them on our Instagram. And I bet you can find the links to those things on our website. Sorry, I don't have a better answer for that one.
No worries. I think that's great. And then for anyone who's wondering, I will be sending out an email with the slides attached and what is it called? That
Activity,
guide.
yes, the progressive
Yeah, the guide.
relaxation.
So you will get access to that as well. And then Heather, I'm going to start sharing screen for your case presentation. And McCall, you're welcome to hop off or stay on as long as you need.
Oh, I wish I could stay so I could hear this. I do have a 1 o'clock, so I'm going to hop off. Thank you so much, friends. We'll
No
see you all soon.
worries. Thank you. All right, Heather, I'm pretty sure that should be up.
Hey, yep, I can see it.
All right, great. I can't see anything, so just let me know.
Okay. All right, you can go to the next slide, Tori.
Okay. Let me get to, there we go.
Perfect. All right, so I'm going to start out by just providing a little bit of background on the case. So this is the Larson family, and again, these names have been changed. So the parents, the mom, Carly, is 22, and Ryan, the father, is 26. Their child, Ethan, is 30 months. He was born full term. It was an uncomplicated pregnancy and delivery. For strengths of Ethan's, he is demonstrating age-appropriate development, cognitively, communication, motor, and the adaptive domains. He really enjoys sitting and looking at books and reading books with mom and dad. He loves playing with cars and trains and anything outdoors. When he is one-on-one, he engages positively. And when he's regulated, he demonstrates warm and affectionate behavior. A little bit about the parents. Ryan is a contractor and he works very long hours. He leaves very early in the morning. He comes home late at night, often after Ethan is in bed. Carly is and she picks up 2 12-hour shifts on the weekends when Ryan is home to watch Ethan. Ethan's parents have reported increasing behavioral challenges over the past 6 months. They talk about him so positively. They describe him as bright, energetic, curious, and affectionate, but they've become increasingly concerned that he's had some intense emotional reactions as of late and difficulties with transitions. Reported behaviors include frequent tantrums that are happening multiple times a day. Some tantrums are lasting upwards of 30 minutes before they're able to really calm him. He will kick, scream, hit, throw objects, and he'll even bite. I left that off of that, but he'll even bite when he's upset. Again, some reported behaviors, difficulties transitioning away from preferred activities, refusal to follow adult directions. He can be aggressive toward Carly when he's frustrated, not so much with Ryan, but with Carly. He's had some sleep difficulties as of late, including resistance to bedtime, and he's been waking up frequently at night. And he also has had some increased clinginess with his mom. Carly and Ryan have limited social support. So grandparents, both sets live out of state. Carly's an only child, and Ryan has one sibling, a younger brother, but he is out of state. He's currently away at college. Because Ryan works very long hours during the week, it's difficult for the family to participate in activities with their neighbors and community because with Ethan's behaviors, they really benefit from both parents being present. Carly acknowledged that she frequently doesn't have any energy. She feels overwhelmed, and she's had some social anxiety that makes her engage with others. So during the week when Carly's watching Ethan, she's spending a lot of time at home and really doesn't have many close friends at all that live nearby. Ethan's challenging behaviors have also contributed to these feelings of social isolation. Several attempts at play dates or when they've had neighborhood gatherings, they've been really stressful because Ethan will have some tantrums or display aggressive behaviors towards his peers, have difficulties sharing toys, and then he becomes dysregulated, and once dysregulated, very difficult to calm. Carly has shared that she feels embarrassed and it makes her very anxious about how others perceive Ethan's behavior. And as a result of his behavior, they have gradually become less likely to initiate social opportunities, as well as receive invitations to play dates. And because of this, they're worrying that Ethan's missing out on opportunities to develop social skills and really have some positive interactions with his peers. The families experimented with a variety of approaches to managing Ethan's behaviors, providing advanced warning before transitions, offering him choices, spending one-on-one time together, making certain that he's getting plenty of outdoor time, plenty of active outdoor play, and then they do maintain a predictable bedtime routine. Carly and Ryan have shared that some of the strategies that they've used in the past that have worked are appearing to be less effective, and this is just exacerbating their feelings of discouragement. Carly reports that on particularly difficult days, she finds it challenging to remain calm and to be consistent in her responses to Ethan's behaviors. And she's also very concerned that Ethan is sensing her stress, and she's concerned that her inability to remain calm and respond consistently is impacting her relationship with Ethan. Ryan expresses concerns about the intensity of Ethan's behaviors, and he feels unsure about how to respond effectively when tantrums occur. Carly and Ryan will occasionally disagree about discipline approaches, which creates additional stress within their household. So goals include emotion regulation for Ethan. So really focusing on strengthening his ability to regulate emotions during times of frustration and really looking at how we can reduce frequency and intensity of these tantrums during daily routines. For the family, they're really looking at positive social participation. So engaging in play and community activities with family members and peers and really doing so for an increased period of time. And then demonstrating safe behaviors and appropriate responses to limits and transitions with adult support. They also really want to work on building their confidence and consistency. So they really want to focus on increased confidence and consistency in using positive behavior support strategies across daily routines to promote Ethan's emotional regulation and to help establish some cooperative play skills and to make certain that their family, and Ethan in particular, can be successful when he's participating in activities with the families with their neighbors. Some barriers would be the parenting practices. So during challenging behaviors, Carly and Ryan have responded differently from one another, and then that's created an environment where there's just inconsistent expectations and consequences. And Carly and Ryan are unsure about the best strategies to use to support his emotional regulation. Of course, there are work schedules and time constraints. So, given their work schedules, it doesn't allow for sufficient opportunities to participate in co parenting or to really have ongoing and regular conversations that are really focusing on Ethan's social emotional needs. Also, because of their schedules, both parents are fatigued by work, by caregiving demands, and it makes it difficult for them to consistently implement positive behavioral supports or strategies because they're often feeling stressed. And then, of course, we've got social isolation and limited support networks. So again, this reduced opportunity and participation in community outings and social activities due to concerns about Ethan's behavior in public settings and limited opportunities to observe peers and receive support from other parents have really contributed to feelings of isolation and uncertainty about how to address Ethan's needs. So we've got, I believe it's 6 or 7 community discussion questions. So really looking for support around strategies and supports that can help Carly manage daily stress and foster positive parent-child experiences, since she is the sole caregiver Monday through Friday. Also looking at some co-regulation strategies that Carly and Ryan can integrate into families' daily routines. So this would be when Ryan is the caregiver on the weekends and when Carly's the caregiver Monday through Friday, that can support Ethan's emotional regulation during transitions and challenging moments. And then some ways to really help Carly and Ryan build a united and consistent approach when responding to Ethan's behaviors. Also looking at some strategies that can simultaneously reduce these feelings of social isolation while also providing opportunities for some manageable but peer interaction for Ethan. Looking at some suggestions to help Carly and Ryan build their confidence and prepare for community outings or play dates, especially after facing some negative social interactions and some judgment from their community, which is in question 6. Some strategies that can really help this family maintain hope and internal connection as they navigate really finding some ways to manage some of these behavioral challenges that Ethan's exhibiting, and also how their neighbors and community are responding to his misbehavior, and also how Ryan and Carly are responding when Ethan does misbehave.
Thank you, Heather, for presenting our case and sharing this situation with us. I believe Leo has our breakout rooms ready, so Leo, you're welcome to send the links and we can chat more about this. Back, everybody. Thank you, Janelle or Leo. I don't know who did that. I know we had a really great discussion. It was a little bit shorter as we're trying to transition. Where we have a couple of minutes, I did want to provide the opportunity for us to share a couple of ideas. So Kurt or Heather Waters or Janelle, I don't know who took notes or who was in that room. Would you guys be willing to share an idea or two?
So yeah, one of the things we looked at, our first question about what strategies can help reduce the social isolation. I'll just hit a couple on this one. There was a couple in our group from home visiting type programs, and they said that they could definitely get connected there, whether they want to be as part of that home visiting program or not. They could always share resources. Also, there's comment about looking at the hospital where Carly works to see if there's programs or people that can give support. They've got social workers there that may be friends that may not be as scary to go and talk to. There might be some people there. So
I love that. That's great ideas. I didn't even think about the hospital. So that is a whole nother area where support can be found. Just because I took notes, and of course, JC or Heather Mitchell, you're welcome to jump in and add to anything. We talked a lot about like what we could do to help support the mom. So like ways that she could maybe get some time away, going to a yoga class, using some supports like there we listed a couple, I'll just list them fast. The Family Support Center, the Family Place, which is located in kind of Cache Valley, and the Crisis Nursery. Sorry, I'm looking away. My notes are on a different screen so I can see all your lovely faces. We also talked a little bit about how we can do that co-regulation between Carla and Ryan. So a last idea that I really liked and I wasn't able to comment on because we were cut off was the dance parties suggested by Emily. So just kind of like giving people a way to regulate themselves, so also moving and doing it together. So there's lots of different ways for that. As we are quickly approaching the end time, these ideas, these suggestions and recommendations will be placed on Canvas. So if you would like access to them, you can email timetoact@aggies.usu.edu. And just as a reminder, we are not having a session in July, but we're beginning that new network in August. So we would love to see you guys on August. Let me make sure I'm getting my date correct so I don't tell you guys wrong. We're going to start on August 19th. And we're going to start our focus on infant mental health. We will have a presenter, our presenter Sandra Stegna. I probably pronounced that so poorly, so I apologize, but it's going to be really amazing. So we hope to see you all there. But anyways, thanks for joining. Have a great afternoon, everybody.